Taylor, and today Page Turning is back, baby, with another very exciting guest. We took a break in August, and we are come back with a bang with Andrew Watson. And also, I'm, of course, with my lovely co-host, PL. So, as always, I'd like to give our guests just a moment to do a self-introduction. I know, Andrew, you do everything in the book space, but is there anything you would like to kind of highlight about what you feel you do in this book world?
Yeah, I just talk about books a lot, to be honest. And the problem is, I've just kind of appeared everywhere talking to lots of people about books. So I'm on a lot of social media now, but it's all pretty much the same stuff. Still talking about books. But yeah, I've got a YouTube channel, Andrew Watson. I'm pretty active on Instagram. Uh, Andrew Watson, or The Fool's Tale is the @ and I am on Twitter, but I don't use Twitter as much, which is not the best because I know a lot of authors, which makes sense because it's a text-based social media, use Twitter, but I am on there too occasionally.
I never made that connection between text-based before in my life. That
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so many authors use like Twitter as their main social media, and it makes sense because
yeah,
a lot of them are visual otherwise. But
yeah. Well, that rolls so perfectly into my next question, which I already mentioned. But you're an author, you're a booktuber, you're a bookstagrammer, and quite a big bookstagrammer at that. You're a broken binding rep. You got some gorgeous pictures on there. You
thank
just
you.
have a lot that you're working on that you do in a visual and not visual medium. So
Mhm.
I guess to start out, how do you balance that? Because as someone
Poorly, very
who
poorly.
I was gonna say, as someone who does like lives and then pre-recorded videos, some vlogs involved in that, that's a lot for me. So I can't
Yeah.
imagine managing all those platforms. So you say poorly, but what does a day look like? How do you schedule it out? How does that work?
Okay, so usually I do things in batches. That's usually what makes things easier. Like I can a lot of doing like for example, Instagram is a lot of it's the setup and the takedown. It's getting the camera, getting the lighting, taking the pictures, moving the files to my computer, editing them. There's so much in between that you can kind of cut out by doing it in batches. So I take like a lot of pictures. I spend like an hour, and 2 hours taking pictures and then shifting it all over, editing and scheduling. Videos are very much the same, but they're a wee bit more intensive. I can't do so many back to back because there's a lot of filming involved and a lot of editing involved, especially editing. I spend so much of my life editing. If it's not pictures, it's videos, is all I do really. That's my free time is editing. But no, I do. I love it. It's great.
Well, we had the pleasure to meet at Worldcon. For anyone watching who's waiting for that vlog, it's coming. Okay, look, that footage and I were having a battle. All right, I'll get it to y'all. But but I was able to meet Andrew while I was there. And one of the first things I said to you may have been a beer or two in, but I was like, your videos are so pretty. And it was but I stand by that in a more sober style and saying that your videos are gorgeous. The cinematography is
Thank
great. I
you.
can tell you spend a lot of time on editing.
Mm.
And I always do a little bit of digging into our guests and I try to save those for later, but I'll throw one out now, which is that I know that you're a filmmaker. You're a videographer,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah.
are those connected, do you think? Your passion for
Yeah,
those two
definitely.
things?
So the YouTube kind of came about because of that. I went into Instagram first and I started just talking about books. I saw all these communities of people chatting about it. And I don't really have many people in real life that read the same types of books as me. So it was great to see this sort of community all chatting about reads and recommending books and such. So that's kind of how I got introduced to the book community, was on Instagram. And I was taking pictures, joining in that. But very much before then, my main focus was video because I did digital media in university and I love editing videos, shooting videos, things like that. Not normally me talking to them. That was completely brand new for YouTube. Because usually shooting like shorts or sketches or little visual effect things and stuff like that was more my wheelhouse before YouTube. But I was on Instagram and I saw Johan, Library of a Viking, jump from Instagram to YouTube. I was like, why am I not doing that? That's a great idea. I can talk about books, I can still make videos, and I do freelance video editing as my full-time job. So it was a good way for me to just kind of be working and keeping up with video editing as well as doing pictures and such. So yeah, it took me about a year after deciding that I thought it would be a good idea to actually make the jump. But eventually, a year later, I was like, I'm just gonna do it. I'm just gonna, make a video, talk about books, and yeah, it's all been downhill since there.
When the snowball started, what are you going to do now, right?
Yeah.
That's interesting. As someone who I keep like pretending I'm going to post about books on Instagram, and then I post two pictures and then don't post for like half a year. So as someone who does genuinely stay more in the YouTube, Twitter realm, do you find that there's a different emphasis between the two? Of course, one is, like you said, a more static medium, or it's shorts, whereas YouTube is longer, you get to talk about it. But do you find that maybe you have an idea for content and you say, oh, this is definitely an Instagram thing, or, oh, this is definitely a YouTube idea? Are they like split in your brain, the types of content?
Yes and no. Usually there's a lot of crossover, but yeah, you definitely frame how you talk about things or how you post about things differently. Like on YouTube, I might wait until I have X amount of books and then I can do a book haul and show them off and talk about the books. Whereas on Instagram, you're going to take a picture of one or two books and sort of get lots of different angles. And I do think that there is people are more willing to watch a video and you talk about a book than read a massive paragraph. So if I'm going to review or get really in depth about a book or talk about it, I do think that's better for YouTube, because I've not found review posts and such on Instagram get as much traction as, say, talking about it in a YouTube video, because it's just a wall of text and it can sometimes be overwhelming. A lot of Instagram is very quick. So, talk about it in much shorter little summaries and what you liked about it, I think works better than just huge reviews. So you definitely think about how and what you're going to talk about, but a lot of it's just the same information, just formatted a wee bit differently.
Mm-hmm. That makes complete sense to me. And it's just it's a skill that you have to take time to develop, right? So that's why I think a lot of people kind of pick their platform and go with it.
Yeah.
But we don't need to go into controversial water here, but we're just talking about visual mediums. And it brought me to thinking about special editions. Now, I know this is something that PL and I have talked about quite a few times, because I'm very much on the special edition train, if you cannot tell.
Yeah. Tell by the shelves.
Yeah, there, being a broken binding rep, I watch your channel. I know what your hauls are like. You're very much on that train as well.
Yeah.
Do you find that over the years your relationship to special edition collecting has changed? Because I find that mine kind of has. I'm curious, just to give you an idea of what I might mean, when they were a little rarer, or maybe when I wasn't subscribed to anything, because I am, full disclosure, broken binding tier 1 subscriber, if I do say so myself. But when I didn't have a subscription and wasn't getting them frequently, they became this almost unattainable thing that I would save up for. But now there's so many of them that I find I have to stop myself, even if there's one that I really like. And I find myself being a little picky choosy, or maybe it's an influx of what I see. Because even though I don't post on Bookstagram, I very much am a lurker. So I see all these beautiful books. I'm inundated with them. Do you find that the way you view them or the way that you've approached collecting them has changed over the years with the influx?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, I definitely see that. Definitely see that as the case. I would say I do find that with just books in general, especially with just growing up. I did, like, when I was younger, used to get like one or two books, and then you read those books back to front 3 or 4 times, and that was what you read. Whereas now I've got so many books that I've not read that I already own that I do feel they don't lose value necessarily, but they do lose that sort of special, you've only got the one type thing. When you become an adult and you're able to buy more books and such, is a lot easier than when you're a kid. And I do think it's the same sort of situation with special editions. And there is a lot more special editions now, but I think they've become way more popular in the last 5-6 years, especially with COVID and the readership starting to pick back up again. A lot of people get a lot more into special editions and reading again, which is really great to see. More people reading. That's how I kind of came back to reading as well, as in 2020. So
Tale as old as time at this point. Right?
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, but even with things like, what I like about special editions now that wasn't the same situation right at the start was kind of how varied they can be and how accessible books are now. You don't need to necessarily go for the £200 leather-bound edition. There is ebooks and things, and there's always ebook sales on, and we're all reading the same books in the end. Yes, amazing to have these really pretty editions, but in the end, when we're talking about it, we always talk about the story and the characters and how those connected with us rather than the quality of the books. But I must say, it's hard. I do still love fancy, pretty special edition, but it's quite good that you do get variations in special editions as well. You can sort of get the £30 sort of broken binding, really nice sort of deluxe standard edition with like sprayed edges and such. But then you can get sort of like the £50 range where you're starting to get like interior illustrations, maybe some fancier materials, and then there's the really luxury high-end stuff that's usually leather bound and multiple illustrations and things like that. So I do think, yes, there's a lot more, but I like that we have more accessibility into what type of special edition you can get as well. Even the special editions have kind of come down in price for how they used to be when there was only one really big type of special edition, like the luxury ones or such. So yes.
TLDR, yes, but for many reasons, right?
Yeah.
No, I think that's a really, really good point about the different levels. I mean, I still dream about subpress. I bought one novella and I'm happy with it for now, but I think that having those tiers is a really good point. But I did want to pass this off to PL a little bit because I've always been curious. As a really avid reader, PL, like the speed that you read is insane. It's wild to me. But you're not in the special edition market yet, right? And don't correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you held yourself back.
That is only because my pocketbook simply doesn't allow for it yet. My lovely wife, who's my business partner, she'd probably put me on some severe restrictions if I started adding special editions to my growing bookshelf. This is part of it back there, but I do love, like everyone else, I love pretty things. Look, come on, like who doesn't love pretty things? I feel like special editions has really changed, especially the indie book buying market. I think that indie special editions, I think indie special editions are just groundbreaking. They're taking the fantasy and sci-fi, especially fantasy book world by storm. And I think you're going to see in the future, almost every indie author is going to have a special edition of some sort. They're becoming more affordable. You can go, like anything else you do with indie, you can make it tailor-made to suit. So if you can't afford the artwork, you just get a nice cover. If you can afford both, you get both. You get sprayed edges, you get this, you get that. But I think soon you're going to see that with indie books, simply because of the draw to special editions. Almost every indie author is going to have an accompanying, like a companion special edition to go with their regular, like frontline, like kind of mass market paperback type books. And with what Broken Binding is doing, and those folks are amazing. Check out our interview with the wonderful Matt, the leader of all things Broken Binding. He was great. Taylor and I had the opportunity to sit down with him. Great, got to see him at Worldcon too, of course. Although he's quite the social butterfly. He was all over the place, and you had to nail him down. But like with what Broken Binding is doing, I mean, I think they're becoming, the premier. No offense to Waterstones and all the other, I think they're becoming like the premier, like the flagship for special editions. And again, I think with indies, what they're doing there, I can foresee a time when almost every indie author is going to have a special edition to accompany their work, which I think is a good thing. I do plan, just quickly to answer your question, Taylor, one day I will have special editions all on my shelf. In retirement, when I can splurge a bit more on, on books and things like that. But yeah, I do love them though. And I greatly envy you, Taylor, your collection of gorgeous books.
Shelves really good.
Yeah.
There's a lot of budgeting that goes into this. All right, don't be fooled, guys. There's a lot of self-control going into that. But I did want to pull up this comment, which I think is so valid, and something that you brought up earlier, Andrew, which is, I love the look of a used paperback on a shelf. That's my special edition. I really like illustrated books, though. This is very true. And I find that it is a different form of special edition. Like you mentioned, Andrew, you read the same things over and over again. The amount of times I read Redwall, when I was young, I was obsessed with those books. I'm sure my paperbacks are falling apart. My Harry Potter series is falling apart, it seems, with how much I read that when I was young. And even my university books, I took a bunch of, I wasn't an English major, but I decided to take a bunch of courses for some reason about Victorian literature. So I have like all of those books with my notes in them also destroyed, but I value those so much in the same way that I would value, a Folio Society edition. Do either of you have like specific series that bring to mind that precious feeling for you? And what would those be? We could start with Andrew and then go to PL maybe.
Yeah. Kidnapped by Robert Louis Stevenson is a big one for me. I actually read it with my grandparents as a kid, and it's just the beaten up old paperback. And we read it as a kid, and I didn't forget about it, but it hadn't really come up in my sort of space of reading in a long time. But then when I was doing my honors dissertation for university in the last year, my granddad actually gave it to me. He gifted it and wrapped it up and everything and said, when you're done with all the, scholarly literature, you can go back to this. And I've still got that. And he actually wrote something in it to do with finishing university. And it does just make it so special because it is a book from my childhood, but also it's got this new meaning of when I finished university as well. So yeah, things like that by far are more valuable to me than a special edition that might not have that same memory and things attached to it as well. Definitely.
The beauty of being a lifelong reader, right? We have those books. Do you have one, PL, that comes to mind? One or two?
Yep, I have a 1952 edition of Lord of the Rings in like kind of old, faded, cracking leather. That I think it's plus 100 years when a book becomes an antique, and then it has to be a certain edition, and then it has to be in a certain kind of shape. But whether or not this set ends up being valuable, they're dear to me because that was the first. Like I read epic fantasy before that. I read Chronicles of Pryden and a bunch of other books, Chronicles of Narnia, things like that. But I think that Lord of the Rings was that first groundbreaker for me, right? And it was an old edition that I got in a used bookstore, and I thought, okay, it's gonna, it's not gonna be with me for long. But I kept it, and I kept it in decent shape. So, and I have a more modern mass market paperback edition too that I keep on my shelf. But those ones I keep away, and once in a while I dust them off, and it's just a bit of nostalgia, I think, really, about a time when long before I ever was a writer of fantasy myself, before I understood what indie was, before I read more expansively, especially more diverse in terms of authors of diverse backgrounds in fantasy, things like that. That old edition of Lord of the Rings, iconic, one of the greatest fantasy series ever written. I think that really it was magical back then when I was reading that, right? I remember cracking that open, and it just had this feel to it, and I still dust it off once in a while just to look at it and remember. So,
just to touch it, right? I do that sometimes too. I have books that are my favorite to touch. It might sound wild, but I do.
There's also, I can't remember what author said it, but there was an author that said he loves when people bring him, the new release or whatever he's got, but he loves even more when someone brings one of his like earlier work and it's clearly like a beaten up, read a million times paperback, and he's just like, he loves to see that the book's been read and loved, and that's the one that he loves to sign. I can't remember who it was, but I thought that was really nice as well, just to see that people are reading it and so many times.
It's a beautiful sentiment. It really is. Yeah, and I think, humans contain multitudes, right? We can enjoy pretty things and also love the sentimentality of, the favorite beaten up paperback.
100%.
And Daniel says, my bookshelves are wild and mismatched, and that's just how I like it. And I just have to say, Yanni, if you're watching this, she's part of like the private book club that we do. Just telling her she's not alone, because she consistently triggers me when we all have our book club chats, because her books, she will specifically go out of her way to get a trilogy of like that doesn't match. Like one's short paperback, one's tall, one's hardcover. And I'm like, My anxiety.
That's one thing I can't do. Yeah, that's
I
one
have
thing I
tons of
can't do.
those. I have tons of those on my
Yo,
shelf. I have tons of
Theo.
those, man. Yeah, so many. Like I have my favorite author, Janie Wirtz, behind me. I've got her main series hardbacks, and I've also got, because she sent me them. So obviously I'm not. Those are gonna stay on my shelf. She sent me them personally. You know how much I admire Janie. She's my favorite author, and she's a great friend. And I've bought her mass market paperbacks, and it's a mismatch of, it's okay.
Listen.
It's all good.
Listen, you saw the breakup of Paige doing right here, everyone.
Oh no.
This is the end.
Oh no.
Yes, it's over
Oh,
this
Final
no.
episode.
It's kind of worse than dog earing my books.
Look, dog ears, I can close my eyes at that, But Nick has a point here too. One negative aspect of special editions is that it can lead to FOMO, while they might artificially limit supply. There's that. Just like a matching hardback set of a series, but I can't find that sometimes. Sometimes I have to settle for a matching trade paperback, which I'm okay with too.
I completely agree with that, but I will say that a lot of the time it's not necessarily artificially limited. A lot of the companies like Broken Binding will approach the publishers and ask them, and they only allow certain runs because they want them to sell out, and then they don't want to deal with it again. They don't want to have multiple nice editions selling at one time. And that's why when you get like special edition of a book, it's usually a wait until you get another run of a special edition of a book, because the publisher don't want it to overlap. So I completely agree with the point. But I will say that usually it's not necessarily artificially limited. It is just what they can run. And that's not always the case. There are cases otherwise, but a lot of the time that is the case.
Good to know, as someone who works behind the scenes with those companies. It's really good for us to know. And my Dark Tower series is very mismatched. Just driving me crazy.
Embrace the mismatch, man. Embrace it. It's all good.
Listen. I don't want to, though.
I think too, for me, what happens is I end up, I've spent this much money on books, like, I feel guilty. So then I go purposely diving for that in that used bookstore. There's one in Barrie that has some great and really good condition, less than $10 editions of a lot of great books, especially classical fantasy. They have a lot of great, really pristine edition ones, and I picked those up, and they look great on the shelf, but they cost nothing almost. And but yes, it may be, if it's a series, it may be that odd, not lining up with the rest, but it's okay. I line my books up in order of height to make it kind of neuter the effect a bit. So
you don't even keep the series. Oh my God, Peel, you and I, we're moving on. Love you dearly. While we're talking about books, Andrew, I started this by talking kind of more about the product aspect of what you do, right? How great I think that the end result of all of your work is. But the reason you do all this work is books, right? So if there's someone watching this who hasn't found your channel, I'd like to give booktubers the question of a 3 to 5 book snapshot of books that would describe you as a reader. They don't have to be your favorites of all time. I'm not putting that pressure on you, but maybe something you read recently that you've really been enjoying, or just something to give people your vibe. If they come to your channel, what can they expect? What's a snapshot of you? Kind of thing.
Okay, this one might actually be really unexpected for the people who watch my stuff, but Dungeon Crawler Carl, I think I mentioned it
Never heard of
the
them
video. Mentioned it once or twice, I think. Dungeon Crawler Carl is a big one. I really like the wackiness, and it's funny. Even with TV shows, I really like the combination of really dark undertones and like a really not messed up, but pretty messed up story with humor sort of layered on top. That sort of duality in tone is so hard to do, but when it's done well, it's so good. And Dungeon Crawler Carl is the book version of that, and I absolutely adore it. So I love that. Stormlight is the obvious one. Most people know or have Stormlight on their list. It's huge. Dark Water Legacy, which is the Ember Blade, which is very classical fantasy feeling, but sort of modernized in the way that it's written. I absolutely love that, by Chris Wooding. What's that? That's 3.
Recently 3 to 5.
But... Yeah. Hobb's another one that's really, really up there for me now. I just recently started it a wee while ago. and I'm on book 3 of the Farseer trilogy, and I love those books so much. The writing, the prose, the character work, it's so immersive. I love those books. They're so good.
Yeah, I mean, it's no mystery to those who watch my channel either that I have a really interesting relationship with Hob, where like when I read her stories, I can see how pretty her prose is. I'm like, how is that sentence cozy? Like, how did you make like the content is not cozy, but the words are. And so I think that she has an extreme talent for writing. But I always feel in the moment that her books feel like a slog to me. But then I finish the book and then I'm like, damn, that was good. But I in the moment, I don't feel that way. It's very complicated. I don't know what she's doing to me. But it's, everyone talks about her character work. So, Stormlight Archive is another big character book. The Ember Blade as well is one that I haven't read, but is that one also quite character based as well?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah. Not quite as much as the other ones, but yeah, I definitely revolve around characters that I really like. That's usually what draws me in a book first, is the character and the voice and the arcs.
Yeah. I think there's I was on Jimmy's Chatting with Nuts at one point, and he was like, "Can we all stop calling ourselves character-based readers? Because I feel everyone is." And I was like, "Well, I don't know. I feel like that's kind of a hot take. I feel like there are people who aren't, though, that care more about world building than anything else." But PL, you're a character-based reader as well, right?
Without exception, I'm a character-based reader, and I'm a character-based writer, and I cleave to characters that are typically love the flawed, messed up characters, love the heroic, noble characters too. Don't get me wrong, some of those are my favorite characters in literature, but my perfectly crafted character is Sandang Lokta from Joe Abercrombie's First Law and the Age of Madness subsequent trilogy. That to me is a perfectly crafted character, flawed, sinister in a lot of ways, complicated, but with this veneer, this layer of morality underneath his own version. You know what I mean? Just that's how, to me, to write a perfect character, you write a character like that, right? Grimy, messy, but still some redeeming qualities, and someone who is so compelling you can't look away from what, like, you always want to know what they're doing. Like, that's my I'm definitely a character-based reader. So
sounds a bit familiar from the Drowned Kingdom saga. Just saying, one of those things. But perfect timing to bring up Abercrombie. That's what I love about Joe Abercrombie and First Law. It's grim, but at the same time hilarious. And Glock does a lot of that. I think in one of your most recent videos, though, not most recent, but a slightly recent one, Andrew, you were listing like the top recommended books, but correct me if I'm wrong, you haven't read First Law yet.
I've not. I'm currently reading or listening to The Blade itself. I wanted to at least have started it before I went to Worldcon, because I know you'd be there. Is one of those series that I know I'm going to love, and it will probably be an all-time favorite, but I've not got around to it yet. And I'm just waiting till I clear out the TBR, and then I can full Joe Abercrombie just back to back. I will be doing like a video and stuff on First Law when it comes out, or when I read it, sorry. I'm very, very excited, because what I've listened to so far, I loved. And everybody talks about it, and I'm like, that sounds like I'm going to love it. I know it's going to be amazing. But I want to finish off like Hob first, because that was another one that I knew I was going to really like, and I just wanted to get that done and out the way. And then Joe Abercrombie is the next big one, I think.
Yeah, when you take on a world like that, it's interesting how we make ourselves wait for a reason, but we're like, no, I got to do this first and then this one, because you want to delve fully into it, First Law was also one interesting. I would be interested to hear your thoughts on Jazal as you go through the series, just because most surprising character interaction I've ever had with a character on page, like my feelings towards the character. So he's definitely got that character worked out. We also have here, Hob got a lot of that from Tad Williams. If you haven't read Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn yet, I would recommend it. That's wild to me, though, to hear that, because we had Tad on, and he's just so personable and kind and lovely. So to hear that he loves to torture his readers the way that Hob does is,
Yeah, he does. He does.
Noted. We got that beautiful Jeff Brown cover for it now, so I'm even more excited to read
Stunning.
it. Yeah.
Jeff's amazing.
He's such a good human.
Yeah.
I just bought the Dragonbone chair. Can't wait to read Memories of Iron Thorn, mainly because it also inspired George R. R. Martin to write A Song by Fire. Yeah.
Yes. Another one of my favorite, absolute favorites, A Song of Ice and Fire. Just, that is top shelf. It's on the top shelf there. What he's written so far anyways. So, but just, and it's just so funny how, I know, Andrew, you must have your inspirations as well. Like, I know I have mine. Most of them are on those top shelves of my bookshelf. The Jenny Wirtz, the George R. R. Martins, the Bernard Cornwells, the Miles Camerons. Who are some of your inspirations as a writer? Curious to know.
Sanderson was probably the first, especially because he was the one that brought me back to fantasy. I was in 2020, that year when I was starting to get back into reading. I went straight back to what I read kind of when I was younger. I picked up a Rick Riordan book. I don't think that's how you pronounce his last name, is it? Something like that. You know who I'm talking about, Percy Jackson.
That's how I've always said it, so apologies.
Yeah, I thought it was that, and I heard someone else saying, I was like, oh, have I been saying it wrong this whole time?
Well, you're not alone. You have.
I picked up one of his newer books, and it was good. I had a good time with it, but it was quite youthful, and I think I was ready to kind of just move into more adult fantasy. So that's kind of when I found BookTube, and I started hearing about Mistborn. Everybody talks about Mistborn, so I was like, right, okay, we'll try Mistborn, and then that's just kind of what shot me back into all of fantasy. It really opened my eyes to what fantasy could be, and then it scales up even more when you get to like the likes of Stormlight and sort of the Cosmere and the interconnectivity, and just seeing the community around that and seeing them all nerd out about all these small details. I was like, this is cool. I like these people. So that was kind of what drew me back in. So he's a huge inspiration for character work and world building. I really like the way he does world building, and he does a lot of really unique world building, but he makes it so accessible, and it doesn't feel like any of it's been info dumped. It is very fluid and weaved through the story, and I really like that about his world building. And then starting to get really into prose stuff, and I started reading some Jay Kristoff stuff, and even Chris Wooden with the Dark Water Legacy. And I was trying to find what I really liked. I think sort of that Dark Water Legacy, Ember Blade style, where it is very lyrical, but it's not necessarily very metaphorical like the likes of Nevernight. That was something I was like, I really like this. This is how I want to write, if that makes sense. So I kind of take inspirations from lots of different authors, but those are kind of like the two big main ones for what I've written so far.
I find that answer to be really interesting, especially knowing what I know about PL's journey with Sanderson so far. He loves prose, right? And you don't have to expand upon this, PL. We have a deep dive, so people who've seen it know. But we're slowly going through the Cosmere, but Sanderson's prose is not what he's known for, So it's really interesting to hear you talk about taking different pieces and kind of combining them into something that, this is how I want to write, but this is how I want my world to be created, and then putting those 100%. Two together. Yeah, it makes complete sense. I don't know.
I really have to reread. I have to reread Way of Kings before I go forward. I know that, as big as it is, I'm trying to, because like I said, there were so many things. I watched that we did the one episode, Taylor and I, with a few other great booktubers about Way of Kings, because I'm the Sanderson novice here. So, and that was my first real try. And there were so many things to like, but yeah, and like I said, maybe on a reread, I will become more enamored with it. Because I remember there were so many things to like, and the world building, there was a lot of great things, especially as Andrew mentioned, the world building. For whatever reasons, the prose just didn't grab me right. And I consider myself, people have called me a prose snob. That's what my friends call me. But, like I said, I'm a Jenny Wirtz. She's my favorite author. She is, the
wordsmith.
Yes. When it comes to prose, she is. But not everybody. A lot of people can't read her books because they find the prose too dense for them, or just too lush. which I totally understand. That's my bag, but we all have different tastes. But yeah, it's interesting that Sanderson is so many people's influence. Obviously, Taylor's a huge Sanderson fan, and I totally get it. I get the hype. Don't get me wrong. I do get the hype. So I'm not, clearly he is a perfect writer, so.
I wasn't putting you to the wolves. I think anyone who's seen that detail, they know that you appreciated what you read. I'm just saying that it's interesting hearing other people mention like some of the aspects that you talked about, right? As you're getting into the world. I mean, you can't see it on the screen, but that's the collection up there, so it's not really a secret. Yeah. It's just not on screen. So
what I really like about Sanderson, especially, and I completely agree, the prose is really just sort of simple. It just pulls you into the story, but there's not necessarily a lot there to really delve into if you're really into prose. But I think he's a lot of people's favorite because he's where a lot of people start. A lot of people get into there's so many people say they got into fantasy as an adult with Mistborn, and I think that really does resonate with you when it's the books that got you into the genre. So I think that's one reason why he's a ton of people's favorite. But also, even his storytelling, I would argue, is simple is not the right word. Very structured, I would maybe call it. In the way that even if you look at something like Stormlight, I mean, he has this world building tied so neatly to the plot, and he has these terms, these ideals. These ideals are tied to the characters, and it makes these really explosive moments at the end of books where the world building all slots into place. The character goes through this sort of transformation point and things like that. It is very neat. And I think that's really good. And some people prefer it to be more messy, more grimdark, and maybe not just grimdark, but more messy and not necessarily as structurally laid out as his work. But it's just, if you're going in for just like a good time, I do find Sanderson's just kind of my go-to good time author. Mm-hmm. Even in the summer when I went to Spain, I was like, right, I need to take some books. Sanderson, because I know I'm going to have a good time. It will just be easy, fun reading, and I'll have a good time with it. And I think for that, he's just fantastic. And I'm not saying there's no depth to it. That's not what I mean. There's tons of depth to it. That's why there's all these online communities and things like that that break down all the foreshadowing, all the depth to it with all the like 17th Shard, I think the podcast is called, and like Coppermind and things like that. There's so much to delve into, so it's definitely not shallow. It's just very neat in the way he structures books, which I think is a good thing for some readers and not necessarily for all readers. So, but I completely agree.
No, it's a good way to put it. A very good way to put it. There was a thought that just left my head, so when it cycles back around, I'll mention it. But we did see here. Also, Daniel says Sanderson does intentionally pare back his prose. If you want his actual style, I would read his essay Outside. And Outside was beautiful. I think that was a beautiful piece there. And he does, because he writes at the speed of just like light, he does have a chance to play with other things, so. Yeah. But we don't, this isn't a Sanderson podcast. I just thought it was nice that we all have different ideas about his works. I wanted to put this up, just part of the Janny fan club as well. This is PL's favorite book to write Hell's Castle.
I've got it. She sent me it, and I've got it on my shelf, and I'm probably going to read it. What month is it? September. Maybe October, November. I want to read it. I'm really excited.
To PL's credit, he's been screaming at me to read it since before Janny had her like resurgence. So to his credit, I just haven't done it yet.
It's okay. It's not going anywhere. You have it, so yeah.
True.
Yeah, my favorite fantasy book of all time to write Hell's Castle.
Really? Okay.
Which would probably not make a lot of favorite people's lists, even amongst Janny fans. It really probably wouldn't even make the top 10, but it is my personal favorite. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah, fantastic.
I wanted to pull this up before I move away from character work. Carl said, my favorite part about Abercrombie is you cheer on some of the most morally gray characters to make the right choice between two wrong decisions. That would be villainesque choices in any other book. And I think this is very accurate. There's so many points in those books where there's just no good answer, but you won't hate the character for making the choice they make because you get the character. if that makes sense. So like another character that sticks out to me like that would be from Greenbone, Ayat Mada. From Greenbone, like some of the choices that woman makes. But then when I think about it, I'm like, would I have done different? Probably not. If I'm gonna be
Hilo
honest.
too.
I
Hilo
just want to
too.
say
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
him.
Yeah.
Oh my.
Hilo
He
too.
never recovered after Jade War for me. He and
He
I
makes
were
some
beefing.
questionable choices.
We're beefing since Jade War.
But you can understand them, and that's all I ask for. I don't know how you feel, Andrew. I think Taylor's the same.
Yeah,
Just let me understand the whys. I don't need to agree with it. Just let me understand the whys and let it be consistent with the character. Like if the character's unpredictable and they could go either way, great. If they are typically they do one thing or another and they keep doing that thing consistently, then as long as it's believable, right? Then I'm good.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. I can hate what they did as long as I know why they did it, right? So I think, fondly, I just praise her character work all the time for that very reason. Like Hilo and we're never going to recover our relationship, but I know why he did what he did. I'm free to dislike that.
But apart from Barrow, apart from that guy, I hate that guy so much. There's no redeeming. No, I hate him.
Have you ever heard me call him a cockroach? Because that's exactly. He never goes away. He's just always there.
Yeah. I get angry when I see that is his point of view. I'm like, oh no, he's back.
Speaking of Jimmy from Fantasy Network, he loves Barrow. So
I remember. Yeah.
I'm also another series that I just utterly morally great characters that make all kinds of messed up decisions. You're wearing Indie now. The Gunmetal Gods series by Zanil Actor. His characters are just a hot mess. But wow, they're on. Sorry, that shoulder over there for me too. Like, they're just
hot.
It's just so well. Messes. Yeah, but it's so well written. It's just so well written, right? So
yeah. Well, all this talk about books we love. Let's get to your books, Andrew. We talked about your inspirations, what you like, how you wanted to write. So you have Harbinger of Justice, which is the first in, I don't know if it's a trilogy or epic series. Trilogy, yeah. And then recently you released a prequel novella, correct? Called Silence is Silver. And my understanding is you could read Silence is Silver first and then Harbinger, or you could do Harbinger first.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah. Okay. You can start with whichever you want. A lot of indie authors seem to be doing this, especially recently. I know Ryan Cahill, I think he was probably the one that really popularized this idea of having the prequel novella and giving the ebook away for free. That means,
like the fall. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So if readers want to check out your work, they can do it completely for free and then decide if that's the type of book that they want to read. So yeah, I've written it so you can start with either one.
So we talked about your motivations for it. Could you give us an idea of what it's about, what readers might be interested in your work?
Sure, yeah. So it is an ancient Egyptian influenced world, and we're following two characters. One is called Rai. He starts off as a sort of a mercenary, kind of has a dark past, sort of your brooding old kind of character who's you learn more about, and you'll learn even more about in book 2. Book 2 is very much his book. Get lots of flashback chapters and learn more about his past. And he has a creature living in his shadow. And he's kind of on the hunt to learn more about this creature that lives in his shadow. And you kind of get more about how that came about in the story as well. And the second point of view is Naya. She's a young girl who lives on the streets. She kind of is part of gangs and things, except she has an abusive mother who's unwell. So it does make the relationship quite complicated. And she gets stuck in this secret project after being arrested for stealing food. And she needs to get back to her mother to make sure her mother is okay, because she can't really look after herself. But to get out early, she has to go through this secret project. And that kind of takes her down a rabbit hole of world building and awful things. It all goes downhill from there. So that's, basic premise.
I love that idea. Actually, it sounds incredible. I'm such a sucker for the grizzled old man with the younger person, even if the younger person's also grizzled. Like, I love that setup. I just read the book That Wouldn't Burn by Mark Lawrence, and there is a little bit of that in there. Oh, I eat that up. So
I did have a review that compared it to that, actually. I have read The
Oh.
Book That Wouldn't Burn, and I think some of the setting is similar, but not necessarily the style of story.
Hmm. Well, something that I find that every author that I speak to is the setting is very intentional, right? So why did you choose to do Egyptian inspired? Like, what was it about that setting that drew you in?
This is like what I always loved as a kid was ancient Egypt. We did it in primary school. We had it as like a project, and I thought it was fascinating. It's like the closest thing we have to real life fantasy, just because there's so many unanswered questions and things that we don't understand. This sort of lost part of history, and I really really liked that. I thought that's such a cool idea, and it makes sense because we have a lot of that type of thing in fantasy. If you look at things like Wheel of Time. So when I was thinking about writing a fantasy book, that was like, it needs to have some draw from ancient Egypt because I love that just as a part of history. I think is really fascinating. So to pull ideas from that is really a ton of fun, and I really enjoy doing it. And there is an Egyptian myth where when people die, they have their heart put on a scale against this feather, and it kind of weighs how they live their life. If it's heavier than the heart, then they kind of get, I think they get thrown into like their version of hell. Whereas if it's lighter, it means they lived well and they get to go to the their version of heaven. And it's very similar. I have that concept in the first book. That's where the Harbinger of Justice kind of comes from. So you do get a bits of that myth, but I did want to take it away from ancient Egypt. I don't want it to be ancient Egyptian fantasy. I just want it to be an influence. So it is there and it's very clear in that first book, but it is its own world.
You're selling this to me real well. I know you said you didn't have an elevator pitch, but this is so. But I think, as someone who's a mythology nut, I love mythology. I love origin stories. I can see why that would grab you, from such a young age, and be an inspiration for it now. To talk a little more about just the fact that you kind of straddle both sides of the aisle here. So you're an indie author. Also, I forgot to say this, but very successful in your own right, because I think it was Silence is Silver sold out the first 50 copies in 12 hours, I must say.
Yeah,
So,
that was
done and dusted.
Thank you.
Congrats.
I had COVID and I was unwell, and it was the week before release. And the number one thing I got with book one was people wanted signed copies. I didn't realize how big a thing signed copies were when I released the first book. So I was like, right, I need to be more prepared this time. When I'm doing the novella, I'll do some signed copies. And I didn't think people would be that interested because I made it very clear that I was giving the ebook away for free. So I thought hard copies is a novella, but I'll make them signed and it'll be nice. And I really like the art, and I've not got a copy with me, but it's got like the art on the naked hardback, and I really like them. I think they look great. I'm maybe a wee bit biased, but I think they look really good. So I thought instead of doing like the usual 100 signed copies, I'll do 50 signed copies, and hopefully we'll sell out. It's a week until release. It means people have that choice over the first week, and it sold out in the first 12 hours. I was like, oh no, I should have done more. I didn't realize there was this much interest for them. But no, that was awesome. That was really cool.
That's what we call a happy accident to not know. Right?
Yes.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So, very successful, like I said, in your own right. You have quite a big reader base that really wants to see what you have to say. But at the same time, you also review and talk about other authors' work. I know you do trad and you do indie. So I'm curious if you have like a way that you think about, not necessarily strict guidelines, but a way that you think about your reviews, or ways that you go about that process, being on both sides of that spectrum. I'm sure it's kind of like jarring at times to be in both worlds, especially with all of the discourse about, negative reviews we've had over the last year. They're cyclical, it comes up every year. But I'm just curious how you personally manage that for yourself.
Yeah, it's weird being kind of on both parts of it as well, especially when you get like emails from people, from authors or interviews and things like that. It's very difficult to see what Andrew they want to talk to. Is it author Andrew? Is it YouTube reviewing side Andrew? Because a lot of people just come in for one and they just know me for one thing and not necessarily the other. And then eventually they quite often feed into each other as well, of course. But a lot of like the opportunities and things usually they're looking for one thing. And it's very strange. Especially the hardest thing for me, I think, is reviewing books of friends, because you're in the space and there's so many people that you get to know. And if you start befriending the authors and you're reading their books and it might not necessarily be your thing, that does make it really difficult. I've not had a case yet where I've read a friend's book and really disliked it. So I've been lucky so far, but it is something that I've thought about, and it does make me a wee bit worried about picking up some friends' books. However, I will say, I think most authors are used to the fact that different readers have different opinions and different things that they look for in books. So one review doesn't necessarily mean that your book is that it is bad or it is good. It's just that reader's experience with your book. So I do think there is a certain level of what's the word? Importance, the fact that you need to be honest, because it would devalue all my reviews if I just suddenly went, oh yeah, I really like this one, when I clearly didn't. I think it just devalues every other review I do, and I don't think any of the authors would want that, because that means every review afterwards, it just loses all of its meaning, because it could be just, oh, he's just lying, it doesn't matter, he's friends with that author. So I do always make it clear that I'm friends with the author, usually when I review it. And also I do try really hard to look at it objectively and just how my enjoyment of the book is, and just trust that the author, the friend, is okay with an honest opinion. And they are. I'm not really friends with authors who would want me to lie about my opinions of their books. So a lot of them are they're all good people. So, and I think as long as you're respectful, even if you dislike some elements of it, if you make it clear and just say, this didn't really work for me, that's fine. I think it's, it's very different than going out 1 star, this sucks, I'm going to burn it, I hate every second of it, this shouldn't have even been written. There is a certain level of, you need to be respectful, because it's so much effort to write a book. And even just to finish it, I don't think I've ever read a book that ever deserved like a 1 star rating. And I could go off on a whole tangent with star ratings and how they mean so little. It's so difficult to do star ratings, because people consider 3 a really bad book. Some people consider 3 a good book, a middle of the ground book. They just loses all weight, because everybody sees a star rating as something different. So that's usually why I don't do star ratings on videos. And even my star ratings on Goodreads, they're so just what just kind of I feel at that moment, and it doesn't necessarily, it's not a good indicator of how I felt about the book always, because people look at the star ratings very differently, if that makes sense.
No, it does. It makes complete sense. I often say on this channel that becoming a SPIFBO judge has made me a better reviewer, because that honesty is so important, and people watch me on BookTube because of my honesty. I mean, there's been a rant review or two, I'm not gonna lie, but there have been a couple in my past. I'm not saying there won't be any in the future, but my point is that a good reviewer will take into account the context of where that review is going, and there is a way to say absolutely 0 aspects of this book match me. This is not, I did not have a good time with it. I did not like this book. Like, I will say that, even if it's someone that I know, I will say, I did not like this, but that doesn't mean you won't. And I think that but is a key point that can separate a useful review from one that's not useful. Because I think in negative reviews, I've heard this from several people, and rings true for myself as well. I have been sold a book based on a negative review. The person said, I hated this. I hated the slow character moments, where the plot didn't go anywhere. And I'm like, like give this to me, So I think that there's a balance that comes with making a respectful but useful, honest review.
Oh, yeah.
And I think you nailed a couple of those points with what you were saying right there. I know, PL, you do amazing written reviews. Yours are basically a book in and of themselves when you write for Before We Go blog. Do you pick and choose which books you decide to write those long ones for? Do you have like a mini version you do sometimes, or?
Yeah, I've really changed. Thank you. And thank you so much, Taylor, for the kind comments. You're an excellent.
It's just the truth. It's like a book. It's great.
But no, I find what I've been doing now is I'm actually been cheating a bit. Is that I've made a kind of a resolve to, when I read a book, especially from a new author that I haven't maybe read their work or a review for, I try to interview them on Six Elemental Interviews on my channel, and I kind of link instead of posting comments for the review, now I link the video to the interview, to try and, like, because I feel like my words are my words, but it's great when the author themselves gets to speak about the book. So I've been doing more and more of that. But in terms of the long reviews, I feel that, there's some books that you gush about certain books, and I'm very selective about the books I read now. I feel like I purposely try and read books only that I think are going to be a 5-star, just based on recommendations or what I've heard, right? I try to aim for those. Like, I mean, why would you aim to read a book that you don't think is going to be, a great book? But those books that I feel that are, for me, potentially, I won't say life changer or life altering, but are going to join the pantheon of books that have really made an impact on me. Those are the ones that I really try now to write those reviews for. And also that books that are criminally underrated, I feel that there's not enough reviews on this book. Why does this book only have 50 reviews on Goodreads or less? Right? More people need to read it more, and hopefully my review, I mean, I'm nobody, but hopefully my review can draw some attention to that author and that book. So those are the ones I tend to put a bit more time and effort into, simply because I feel that they're under the radar books that deserve attention. And my review on Before Go blog, in terms of like the social media blog space, might be the only review in that type of space that author might have. So I feel that, that's something that needs to be rectified, and that's why I do those ask reviews sometimes. So.
You and Patrick, man, you guys kill it with the book length reviews too.
Oh, yeah. Patrick is on another level. He's amazing. Yeah, he's incredible. John Morrow, Esme, they're those reviews are just.
Yeah. I don't know how to read so quick.
I know.
It's insane.
I can't. My eyeballs probably physically cannot move that fast. It's wild. But speaking of things being underrated or things not getting enough attention, a question that I would really start to like asking, I don't know why that sentence didn't work for a second, creatives that we have on here is the nature of the beast of being on BookTube. I'm sure on other platforms as well, but BookTube is where I have experience, right? Is that you'll put out, you've been making videos for years now. You'll put out some videos you're really proud of, some you're not so proud of, but regardless, time moves on. And the algorithm cares about the newest thing you put out. And I've talked to many creatives, and I know we did discuss this a little bit, Andrew, as well, at Worldcon, but like the feeling of having to make the next thing, even once that previous thing is barely released into the world, right? So I want to make a space here for creatives to talk about one or two videos or posts they've done in the past that they're the most proud of, and they would like to direct people to. Even if it was 3 to 4 years ago, maybe your lighting wasn't the best, but the content, you're still really damn proud of that, or your editing. I would like to create a space for people to say those, and then I will put those videos in the description. So if people want to go watch them. So do you have anything in your library of videos that you're like, or on Bookstagram, even a review you did, or where you're like, I still am really proud of that, and you would like to direct people to it? Does anything come to mind?
Yeah, definitely. I have a video that's actually semi-recent. I've not uploaded much in August, so I think it was July, but it was a bookshop video. I called it Bookshop Hunters, and it's the dumbest concept I think I've ever come up with, and I was 100% ready for the video to flop. I thought, no one's going to watch this, but I really want to make it because I think it's going to be really funny. It's got this dumb idea where I'm going around different bookshops and I'm rating them on different scales, but I've kind of framed it like almost like a National Geographic type thing, and making them out to be these giant creatures that we're going to investigate. And it's so silly and dumb, but I had an absolute blast filming that over 2 days with my friend. They're so hard to make because I do need someone else out there with me filming. It was so much fun just going around the the different bookshops. We went around Edinburgh, and just exploring them, filming some of the insides, rating them. And I had this really dumb idea. So I think there was 6 different criteria to rate them out of 10. So the max you can get is 50. But I had this really silly idea that there's a final rating. This does it stock Harbinger of Justice, and if the answer is no, they get negative 100 points. And of course, I went to Waterstones and all the big ones that there's no way they're going to have stock of it. So they were all in the negatives. All of them had negative final points. I thought it was hilarious. It's the dumbest joke ever, but I thought it was really funny. So I would love to do more Bookshop Hunter videos because I had a blast filming that, and definitely that one. And again, that was a case of I was expecting it to flop because it is so silly, and I don't know how you even market something like that for the algorithm. But the video did really well, surprisingly. So I would definitely do more like that. That was a blast. That's so much fun.
Well, clearly you found your people because we have the Bookshop Hunters videos, comedy gold. Yeah, I feel like, when you have those videos that you just enjoy making, it comes through.
Yeah, 100%.
Through the screen often. Even if sometimes they are a flop, though. They are the ones that you enjoy. But I find that even if that's the case, when you rewatch them, you're like, oh, I can tell I'm happy here. I can tell this is something that I really enjoy making.
I'm all up for making videos that I know will not necessarily perform that well, as long as I'm going to have a good time making them. And I usually try and intersperse them throughout videos that I think will do well. And again, you never know if a video is going to do well or not. It's very difficult to judge that sort of thing. But there's some that I'm just like, this is a risk. This seems unlikely to do well, but I want to make it. But I'll pair it and do a video next week that usually
between a top 10.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
The top 10 lists. Yep.
Always do well.
Always. 15's too much. 5's too little. That 10, everyone
10,
clicks it.
That's the right one.
The Goldilocks number. So I've got Bookshop Hunters. Definitely will be down in the description down below if anyone wants to watch it. And if that's the only one, that's totally fine. But is there anything else you would like to direct people to? Or is that one?
I did do a spoiler-filled video on Uzumaki last October.
Ooh.
And I kind of shot it and I wanted it to be like the spirals kind of taking over the video as well. And it all comes to this climax at the end where I do some fun VFX stuff. That video didn't do that well, but I think it was pretty good. I had fun.
Sounds like that editing skill would be beyond me, so I'm kind of interested. I personally am a little baby bitch, and I do not read visual media horror. If it's not visual, I'm all right. But manga, it really, so I haven't read Uzumaki, but I don't plan to, so I wouldn't spoil myself. So I think I might check that out. Have you ever tried any? Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm just saying it's a weird book. It's a really weird book.
Listen, none of the concepts I've heard from Junji Ito are normal by any stretch of the imagination. Yeah. That man has a wow. Have you ever heard of him, Pio?
I've heard of him, and I've never read any manga. I've never read. I know one day it's inevitable. I will get there, but no, I have heard of him. So I'm not sure what, but I'm sure not sure what the content of stuff is all about. So.
Well, Andrew mentioned spirals, right? So Uzumaki is basically a town is haunted by the pattern of a spiral, and he has this
concept.
Really, he has these weird concepts. But then, of course, I've seen the art. Like I haven't read it, but I've seen the art, and he can take this thing that shouldn't be creepy and make it creepy and weird by his art. But I'm just too much of a little baby to read them all the way through, so I haven't. But
so many people read it and then they start saying that they start seeing spirals everywhere just because you start looking for them. It's confirmation bias, but even still, it does become. Oh, that was a spiral. I remember I started reading it, and I went downstairs, and the kitchen roll had a spiral pattern on it. I was like,
oh no! And so
I started to put bits like that in the video as well because I thought that'd be quite funny. Just like have their and sort of sitting in the background. Yeah.
Now I have to watch this. I have to watch this now. I'm so intrigued. Thank you for that. See, this is why I want to start asking that question because I don't read Uzumaki, so I would not have found that video. But now I am 100% watching that. like watch later playlist immediately. But it does kind of make me curious because you both laughed at me when I said I was a little baby. Do you both, are you okay with horror? You both are not phased by it, like visual medium horror? You're cool with it?
I've not really read much at all. Uzumaki was kind of my first manga, so that was just me sort of testing it out, and it wasn't too bad. I didn't think it was overly frightening or anything. It was creepy, but not necessarily frightening. There's a lot of, okay, that's really weird, sort of moments in it, but not necessarily scary as such. I do want to find something in October that's scary. I'd be interested just to see how scared you can get from a book. I think Exorcist is the one that most people point to as like one of the scariest books, so I might try that. And I've got Ray Bradbury as well that I do want to read eventually. So I might read that. I don't know how scary that is, but it is in the horror-y category. So yeah, I've not read tons, but I do want to try more. I did read It, actually, Stephen King. Not necessarily frightened by it. It's creepy, but again, I've not necessarily felt overly scared from it yet.
I felt the same way about It, and knowing that I'm easily scared. That was what showed me. Maybe I can read horror, I just can't see it. Like if I make up a story, then I think I'm okay. As long as it's not visual. It is the one that showed me that. But I mean, PL knows, Cosmic Horror, the Gunmetal God series you mentioned earlier. I can't even. There we go. Sorry, y'all. It's been a day. That series is the one that showed me that I can enjoy specifically cosmic horror. So that kind of opened the door to. I read the only book that I've read that scared the living crap out of me was Nightfall by Daniel Barnett. Okay. It's a novella, but it's like a series of novellas, and I think the last one is longer. It's called Lullaby. It's longer, but the concept is: what if the sun just goes out? There is no warning. There is no reasoning. It just goes out, and people lose their minds. And I made the brilliant choice to read this novella at 2 a.m., where the sun is nowhere near on either end of that time frame. And when I finished it, I was like, oh, please, dear God, let the sun come up in the morning, because I was genuinely creeped out and terrified. So I would highly recommend that one personally for myself. But PL, do you read horror at all?
Yeah, it's funny. I have read a lot of horror in the past. When I was younger, I read a lot of Stephen King. I think I've read mostly everything he's written, but not in recent times. I haven't done rereads and things like that. I read a bit of Dean Koontz, really good horror. This is the psychological aspect of the horror. But you mentioned Gunmetal Gods again. Thanks to Zamil, I'm very much like the cosmic horror. I can see myself going for, because I love the way he does it in his books, and it's so like just. The cosmic horror aspect in the Gunmetal God series really it's just shocking. Like it just, like you're reading something and you're like, what did I just read? And then you have to go back and reread it. I find and those books exceptionally well done. But yeah, I don't read as much horror as I would like, but what I do like is the fantasy horror combination. So I love when books incorporate horror. I've also read a bit of historical fiction that incorporates that horror, and that's really interesting too. So what I like is that blend. I think, like, I don't know if I'd ever become a straight up just horror reader. It's not that I don't like horror, but I'm so much into fantasy specifically. But I do love when a writer adds those horror elements in. I think that's really cool. So yeah, I guess that's my answer to that one.
I feel like my guideline has been, my toxic trait is, I believe that if it was a human killer, I could take him. But if it's a ghost, I can't. And there's nothing I can do about it. So once it goes into the ghost territory, that's not for me. I tried to read one ghost audiobook. I was like, nope, can't do it, because I would see the spirals everywhere. I would get noises. If it's a human killer, like I said, I got you. Bring it on. So
yeah,
exactly. I dare you. Yeah, toxic trait, like I said. So that's kind of been my guidepost for that. But it's already an hour and 10 minutes. Andrew, and these go so quickly. You've been so generous with your time, and we don't want to take up too much more of it this time around, of course. But I always like to give the guests a moment to sign off, let people know where they can find you, anything you have coming out, where they can get your books. I'll also have those links down below. I will update them after we stop the video here. But just sign off, let people know where they can find you.
Sure, yeah. You can find me probably most active on Instagram or on Discord. I have my own Discord as well. I do have a YouTube channel. I am going to come back and be very active on there. August kind of fell off, but I have a video that should be going out today. I just need to finish one clip and render out and upload it. So should be a video going out today as well. And you can buy my books pretty much anywhere you buy books. You can, from Waterstones to Blackwell's to Barnes & Noble to Amazon to Broken Binding. And if you use code FULL15, you can get 15% off at Broken Binding. And I think that's pretty much it.
Wonderful. And PL, I realized that I never quite handed it over to you. So even though Andrew just did his sign off, is there any question that you didn't get out or anything you wanted to say? I realized I never officially handed it all over to you.
No, you did an amazing job. As usual, your questions were, as always, on point. No, it was great. I just hope that we get to have Andrew back on at some point, especially as his writing grows and we can talk about more of his books. Just P.L. Stuart, author of John King Saga. www.plstuart.com is the books. You can find me most of the time beside my wonderful co-host Taylor here on either her channel or my channel. Really, it's both. We do page chewing on, and where we have some really exciting things planned for the future and more amazing guests, just like Andrew. Taylor mentioned before we go blog, just as Taylor is, I'm an assistant editor there under our wonderful leader, the awesome Beth Tabler, with a bunch of amazing other bloggers that put out some phenomenal content. So check out Before I Go blog. See my reviews on Goodreads. Other than that, on my own channel, the John King Saga 7847, I do things like reviews, interviews. My interview series there is called 6 Elemental Interviews. So check that out. Gotten about 8 or 10 so far. So I just, we're trying to also build with that. So but primarily when I'm on YouTube, I'm beside Taylor. We're doing page chewing, and that's where my heart lies, and that's where I get the greatest joy out of almost everything that I do. So, that's me.
It's hard to follow up that sign off because he does so much. The both of you do, but if you stumbled upon this channel, maybe through Andrew, my name is Taylor. Maybe between the pages, I do booktube, the usual booktube videos, reviews. I do life in Japan vlogs, that kind of thing. Assistant editor Before We Go blog, and page chewing. Those are kind of the main things that I'm doing right now. Oh, also Spiffbo judge. So we're in the middle of Spiffbo 10 right now, and I should be reading instead of doing this interview. That's how that's going. Working on it.
Have you got
yes. Before we go blog, the way that we do it is there's a group of us. So we will each read, we get the slush pile of 30. And then from there, we split it out to who might be interested more in this book to give all of them like a fair chance so that they're being read by someone who might enjoy them. But then after that, once we go to semis, once the semifinalists are announced, all of us try to read at least some of those, and we can all pitch in for the finalists. So the semis have been announced, I think, all of them. Or if they haven't, they will be all announced soon. So I have quite a few to read from that before we pick our finalists. Do you follow Spiffbo at all?
Yeah. I've read a couple of the winners and such, like Murder at Spindle Manor, the winner from last year.
I saw you talking about that. So
that was good. Yeah,
such a good book.
Yeah.
We had all of the finalists on page chewing, but unfortunately Morgan does not do anything like this. Again, they're completely no social media of any sort. So haven't gotten to talk to Morgan, but also Jad's here, big supporter of page chewing. Yeah, it's okay. The replay's still going to be there though. So thank you for coming. So yes, thank you to everyone in the chat. You guys being here is what makes these what they are. So thank you for all of your really interesting comments and questions. And thank you again to Andrew for being the first person. Yeah, the first person on after our hiatus. Best way to come back, I feel. Ready to go.
It'll get better from here, I promise. There'll be more interesting guests.
Hush.
It's okay.
All of Andrew's stuff will be linked down below. Thank